All right, so let's get into this discussion now. So Deputy Defence and Military Veterans Minister Bantu Holomisa is calling for an internal investigation into the department's bookkeeping processes. According to a TimesLive report, Holomisa flagged shocking irregularities, including wasteful expenditure and a lack of transparency in some lease agreements. But what could be going on in the department? To get some views on this, we bring in Defence Analyst Dean Wingrin. Dean, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to look at some of the, I suppose, the allegations and the issues that have been brought forward by the Defence Minister. But I want to start with this before that, and perhaps some politics, if you will, if you can dip your feet in that, because there's something to be said about this government of national unity and then having opposition, formerly opposition parties that are in government, even if they're in deputy positions in various departments, and what they're able to uncover. Is that something that's top of mind for you?
Most definitely. And good morning to you and the viewers. I think it's a very good thing that there's leaders and opposition parties in the government of national unity, as it brings in a fresh perspective into the various departments, and particularly the Department of Defence, with Deputy Minister Holomisa there. He's got a tremendous amount of experience in the defence environment. And as we can see, he's now bringing that experience to bear on the department and within the government to see exactly what the issues and the problems are and how best to remediate those. Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at what he's bringing to the fore here. And we'll go through a few things. He's talked about the department reporting 338.9 million rand in breaches. You can give us your response to that. But as part of that is 183 that's linked to Project Tano with Cuba. I mean, those are big numbers that are being touted there, in a project in another country. What do you make of that?
Yes, you mentioned Project Tano, and this is it's going on for quite a few years now, where South African government has entered an agreement with the Cuban government for various Cuban technicians and engineers and so on to come to South Africa to repair military equipment that has been deteriorated so bad in South Africa that they cannot be used. Much of it, which was originally built in South Africa, as well as sending staff and students to Cuba for training in various aspects, such as air traffic control, pilots and engineering courses, and so on. Very similar to what the Department of Health is sending medical students to Cuba. And well over 1 billion rand has been spent, has been paid to Cuba so far. And but I think just to take a slight step back as well, in that we've got something called irregular expenditure and something else called sort of wasteful, fruitless expenditure. And these are two sort of, although often lumped into the same conversation, these are two sort of different concepts. In the sense that irregular expenditure is not wasteful, in that the department still gets some benefit from it. It's just that something in the expenditure that doesn't conform to the proper procurement processes and legislation. So it could be something as very simple as obtaining 2 quotes instead of 3 for a small item, to extending an existing contract without proper authorization, and or to go to something much more serious, such as tender irregularities, although the service is still being provided. Whereas fruitless and wasteful expenditure is where the money is just thrown away for absolutely no benefit. And that's a very good example will be for the COVID drugs, the interferon drug that was purchased from Cuba, and over $2 million was paid for that a few years ago, where the drug wasn't even approved for use in South Africa, or leasing buildings that stand empty.
Yeah.
So when we look at this, if you look at the irregular expenditure, by far the biggest expenditure there that is highlighted by the AG, the Auditor General, is a cost of compensation to employees. And this is the salaries that is paid to the soldiers and sailors and airmen and so on. And this is simply because over 60% of the entire defense budget of about 52 billion rand goes to compensation of employees. And just, it's something that is out of the hands of the defense force, really, in that what the soldiers are paid is not determined by the defense force. That's a government competency that states how much they're being paid. The mandate and the structure and the force structure of the defense force is not determined by the defense force itself or the Department of Defense. That comes from cabinet and from the president as commander-in-chief.
Right.
So the defense force is under very difficult circumstances and position, where it's got to pay, but it's not being funded properly for it. But of course, the defense force is not entirely blameless. And, there's other issues there where procurement procedures are not being followed correctly, outdated IT infrastructure, and the procurement and logistics management systems are just not set up for the modern supply chain management and procurement environment.
Yeah, I mean,
that is where these issues come in.
And that's correct, because one of the things that you hear from the Deputy Minister, Bantu Holomisa, essentially saying that the fact that material errors were detected so late points to a lack of effective controls and quality assurance systems. And of course, what he's calling for is a look into the quality of bookkeeping within the department, because it certainly speaks to the integrity of processes, right? And once you've got integrity issues, there are some might ask questions around the intentions behind some projects. For instance, you've got 46.7 million rand lease agreement for St. George's Hotel, where the procurement process was not properly followed. So bookkeeping, yes, but it also speaks to the intention behind choosing particular service providers or partnerships, right?
Most definitely. I'm sure training does come into it, as in any business environment. But as you say, this is a government department, and unfortunately within South Africa, the civil service does have certain people who've got other vested interests in there, and these things do crop up, and that's sort of also another issue is lack of performance management and consequence management for the lack of performance. In that certain issues that, as you've highlighted, there's no consequences for the people where it does, where they should be held responsible for this. And I think one of the issues for that is that the accounting officer of the Defence Force is the Secretary of Defence. But discipline within the military falls under the Department, it falls under the Department of Defence, while the Secretary of Defence is more of a civilian role. And thus there's a little bit of a conflict as to how a civilian can discipline a military officer. And that needs to be worked out. And so proper performance management, consequence management can be implemented.
Yeah, what also I think is important to note is, the impact of, I suppose, where you've got structural infrastructure, technical infrastructure that is not up to speed. You've got at the end of that, veterans that perhaps are not getting the support that they need to be getting. Because what he's also observed, the Deputy Minister Bantu Holomisa there saying, there were delays in registering military veterans in the database, in instances where it took 12 months to process qualifying veterans, speaking about the military veterans beneficiaries database managed by the ICT department, stating the system generated reports on user access and management records could not be provided. So lots of data issues, it seems, technical problems. But it's interesting that you've got a deputy minister who's looking at minute details of what is particularly wrong with the entire system of our bookkeeping and our record keeping. I think that really is something to be talked about. And if it restores your confidence in now the leadership that we have within the department.
Yeah, indeed. It's good that these things are spoken about and not kept under wraps. In fact, It's a lot of this has been spoken about for the last 4, 5, 6 years, and nothing has been done. And it's actually good to see that we've now got 2 deputy ministers there, whereas previously we had 1, and that we've got a new minister there as well, Minister Masheka, and that we've got a completely new set of eyes that is looking at these issues, and they certainly seem determined to try and sort things out within the department. And there's certainly some systemic and deep-rooted issues there. It's not going to be quick to fix these things, but at least a start has been made to try and fix this. But a lot of it needs to come as well support from National Treasury, whose actual boss is the president, and that is where the impetus as well needs to come, and to say to the Defence Force, if I mandate you to do all these internal deployments, these external deployments, then I must fund you and capacitate you in order to do these things, because it's really not fair on the Defence Force to be given all these extra tasks and then not be funded and capacitated to execute those properly and legitimately.
Yeah, and just briefly, so would you then agree that the internal investigation that the Deputy Minister is calling for does need to happen?
Indeed, yes, certainly.
Okay, great. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Dean. Dean, an absolute pleasure. Dean Wingrin, who is a defence analyst there, responding to news coming out that the Deputy Defence and Military Veterans Minister, Bantu Holomisa, is calling for an internal investigation into the department's bookkeeping processes.